Ireland is a small country off the coast of England, filled with kind people with a rich and complicated history. Known for their luscious green lands and wonderful flora and fauna, Ireland attracts millions of tourists each year. Despite its beauty and celebrated culture, it's a country who has had more than its fair share of hardships. From getting taken over by England to having a 6-year-long potato famine. But one major difficulty they had was the almost death of their native language, sometimes referred to as Irish or Gaelic. Ireland went from all of its population to speaking Irish to only 1.8%. But how did this all happen? How does this almost death of their native language affect their communication and ties with their culture? How much does reviving Gaelic mean to them? And how is it being revived today? Well, to answer these questions, we will need to go way back to the 1500s. England began its rule over Ireland in 1169, but wasn't fully under British rule until 1541, when England started sending settlers to Ireland. Later in the 1600s, they started to settle in the province of Ulster, where they called the settlements plantations because they planted settlers there that were loyal to the British. These settlements, or plantations, started to spread throughout Ireland, which led to more and more rebellions against the crown in the 16 and 1700s. These rebellions were ran and organized by an Irish group called Irish Republican Brotherhood, otherwise known as Fenians, that wanted freedom from the British rule. They had many members and helpers, but in the end, all rebellions failed, until the 1880s when Irish resistance became more and more effective. They found that if they began to use democratic methods, it would hit England harder. They began to campaign for Ireland to have a home rule, where they would still be part of the United Kingdom, just have their own parliament. And most Irish Catholics thought this was a good idea, but English Parliament did not. In the 1880s and 90s, the Parliament in London rejected this idea twice. Their thought process was, if Ireland wanted this, then what's to stop other countries they had control over, like India, from wanting the same? But how does England taking control of Ireland have anything to do with the death of the Gaelic language? Well, while Ireland was under the English rule, new rules and laws started to take place. The first law officially enacted in Ireland was called the Statute of Kilkenny. And in Article 3 of this law, it states that if you're an English colonist, or if you're native and interacting with a colonist, it's illegal to speak Irish. This law stopped English colonists from learning Irish completely. The next law the English Parliament passed was in 1537, called the Statute of Ireland, an act for the England order, habit, and language, which prohibited the use of Gaelic language in Irish Parliament. Then in 1541, English Parliament made it completely illegal for anyone to speak any Irish in areas of Ireland under British rule. This hit hard on the Irish language, because now many people weren't even allowed to speak it. The last law passed that affected the use of Gaelic language was passed in 1737, and it was called the Administration of Justice Act. This forbid the speaking of Irish within the courtroom and completion of legal documentation. If anyone were to break this rule, they'd be faced with a 20-euro fine each time it was spoken. Because of all these laws, the Irish language started to plummet, and the people of Ireland started getting madder and madder. Fortunately, in 1853, the Ossianic Society was founded to protect Gaelic literature. This led to the founding of the Society for the Preservation of the Gaelic Language in 1877, and the beginning of the Gaelic Revival. This included not only language, but also Irish culture and sports. In 1892, Douglas Hyde, who eventually became the President of Ireland, gave a motivational speech. We must teach ourselves not to be ashamed of ourselves, because the Gaelic people can never produce its best before the world as long as it remains tied to the apron strings of another race in another island, waiting for it to move before it will venture and take any step by itself. These cultural societies began with the goals of saving Irish culture, but they soon became intertwined with the Irish nationalist movement that began seeking Irish independence from Britain. Many members were part of the Easter Uprising in 1916, which was the first step towards Irish independence. 2 years later, in December of 1918, an election was held where they would vote on who would represent Ireland in British Parliament. A group named Sinn Féin was elected. Instead of being representatives, they chose to set up a new Irish government in Dublin. On 21st of January 1919, Sinn Féin had successfully set up Dáil Éireann, the new Irish Parliament, and officially declared Irish independence. But it didn't end there, because this had just begun the Irish Revolutionary War. After Sinn Féin declared Irish independence, war began. It was a new Irish Republic's army against British police forces, and at first it began as a conflict, but soon it turned into a full, deadly war. England started to put a curfew on Dublin because the war was becoming very violent. England even sent World War I veterans as reinforcements. They attacked many Irish cities, killed many civilians, but Ireland wasn't standing down. On July 11, 1921, both sides agreed to end the war with a truce, most likely because of all the damage being done to Ireland. They officially signed a treaty named the Anglo-Irish Treaty on the 6th of December, 1921. This allowed Ireland to become its own dominion in the British Commonwealth, and for Northern Ireland to remain completely under the British rule and part of the United Kingdom. Now Ireland was freer than ever before. They could now make their own laws and freely speak their own language and practice their culture. But the British laws had taken a toll on the Irish language. Because they had suppressed it for so long, barely anyone knew how to speak it. The next chapter for Ireland was to continue reviving their language. Now, Ireland had been without most of its population speaking Irish since the 1500s, and now that they were free, a lot of people wanted to revive it. It wasn't as simple as it seemed, though. One big effort to revive Gaelic occurred in 2003, when Ireland passed the Official Languages Act that promoted the use of Irish for official matters of the state. This set guidelines to use Gaelic in courts all around the nation. One big organization that helped to spread and teach Irish was Radio na Life. This Irish language station was created by a community group to create a cultural service and to raise enthusiasm about learning Irish and staying in touch with their culture. This helped a lot of people get back in touch with their Irish roots. And even the station manager at Radio na Life, Kim McCartig, states that if it weren't for the station, you probably wouldn't have learned any Irish. Another big step for the revival of the Gaelic language was that they started teaching it in school as a mandatory class. Kids would start learning it in grade school and continue until they graduated high school. Mary McAleese, the president of Ireland at the time, was very supportive of the Irish language. She even appointed an Irish language commissioner named Sean O'Kieran, who tried his best to spread enthusiasm. He ended up stepping down in 2014 though, because he was dissatisfied with the progress being made in promotion of Irish language rights. When he stepped down though, it raised even more awareness, and more people started to take interest. The president even organized a tribute to him that same year in March. Sean also wrote many children's books and received a Pierce Award in 2014. And on top of all these efforts, Irish is still being revived to this day. So, we've answered how this all happened and what's been done to help revive it today, but we still have more questions to answer. What does it mean to the Irish people to have their language taken away? How did it affect their communication and ties with their culture? And what does the revival of Gaelic mean to the Irish people? Well, to get an idea of this, I was fortunate enough to speak with Jamie Sugrue, an Irish native who grew up in one of the few towns left where Irish is spoken in homes, stores, and businesses on the regular.
Yes, féidir ag an rá scoilga. Is Mr. Jamie is as Kirime agus tomsig den of stadéir ag glóis na trónóda agus ibriam vírish scores imoni lefta. I mean that's Jamie, and I'm from Kerry, and I'm in college in Trinity, and I work on viruses and the immune system. I've had like a really nice relationship with the Irish language, I think, because as I mentioned earlier on, I grew up in the southwest of Ireland in a small town, a small village called Ballinscalligs, which is one of a few like pockets of Irish-speaking areas in the country. So it's called the Gaeltacht. So the idea behind those little pockets of Irish or those little Gaeltachts is that people in those areas use Irish as their primary language. So I would have spoken Irish at home with my family, and then also carried out most of my education, primary and secondary education, through Irish. But then when I came to university here is through English. So I did all my subjects and everything else through Irish up until the age of 16, and then my last 2 years of high school, or high school equivalent, were in English. But yeah, I have lots of younger siblings and stuff who also, speak Irish on a daily basis, and also are still in school and do their, schooling through Irish. So very important. Irish is very important to me.
What does reviving the Irish language mean to you and the rest of the Irish people?
So some people think that it's not important, that it's a dead language and that we should just let it die, or dying language and we should let it die. I mean, obviously I sit on the other side of the fence there, and I think that it's important that we do our best to pull it back. And I think that's an opinion that is pretty widely held. I think the majority of people would like to see Irish more widely used.
Jamie is proof that parts of Ireland still have homes where sisters and brothers speak Irish to each other. However, when you walk around Dublin, you will only find English speakers. This happens even though every Irish child is taught Gaelic in school. So the current challenge is to keep it thriving. Because while the Irish language may be spoken less frequently, the pride of the Irish people is tremendous. Currently, Irish is the official language of the Republic of Ireland and the fastest growing language on the popular language app Duolingo. As an American, try to imagine your football Sundays being taken away, or it being illegal to speak English. What would it mean to you to lose them? What would you give to get back your culture and to maintain your roots?